What's up, Motocross Action? I'm Josh Mosiman, and today we have the privilege of riding Jo Shimoda's factory Kawasaki KX250 from Pro Circuit. This thing is beautiful to look at. There's lots of trick parts that we've already been drooling over today. Jo Shimoda scored well in his first season with the Pro Circuit Kawasaki team. He got a win in Supercross along with multiple other podiums. He also scored multiple podiums in the outdoor series as well in the 250 class. So I'm super excited to get on this bike today, feel the differences, and see what it's all about. So stay tuned to this video as we shake down Jo Shimoda's factory race bike. The privilege of being a motocross action test rider comes with perks, and at the top of the perk list is being able to ride factory bikes like this one. Jo Shimoda was a new hire for the Pro Circuit team last year in 2021, and he's been one of their top placing riders since he joined the team. Considering that Jo Shimoda first started riding and racing in the US at only 10 years old and moved from Japan to California full-time at 14 years old, he and his family have certainly dedicated their lives to this sport, and now it's starting to pay off. In the off-season leading up to 2022, we met up with the Pro Circuit team at Glen Helen, ready to experience heaven on earth in the form of a factory Pro Circuit Kawasaki KX250, the same bike that Shimoda finished second on at Hangtown. Thankfully, our only time limit on this bike was that the track was closing at 2 o'clock, a little bit earlier than normal, but we made the most of the day with 5 different test riders lined up, keeping the bike on the track practically non-stop all day, only coming back to the pits for a few minutes at a time to fill up on fuel. Jo Shimoda runs handlebars that are a little bit positioned back and a little bit tighter than normal, so after we got used to the tighter cockpit of his KX250, our attention turned to the engine package, and our first impression about that was that it wasn't as fast as normal. MXA's managing editor Daryl Eklund has ridden Ryan Villopoto's factory Pro Circuit bikes in the past multiple times, and both Daryl and I rode Austin Forkner's Pro Circuit 250 at the end of the 2018 outdoor season. So what do we remember from the past factory Pro Circuit bikes was that they were ultra strong on the bottom end, and they had a strong hit as soon as you cracked the throttle. And we didn't find that on Jo's bike. The 2021 Pro Circuit race bike had to be revved to the moon to find factory power. So was Jo Shimoda's power band weak? No, not at all. This bike took Jo to his first podium in Supercross at Indianapolis. It helped him win his first Supercross at Salt Lake City, and it got him a total of 3 podiums in the Outdoor Nationals, and you can't do that with the power band that's slow. The power was far from bad, and after we learned how to ride it, all 5 of the MXA test riders fell in love with this factory Pro Circuit KX250 engine. We were getting the same sensations on this factory 250 that we would get on a 350. The bottom end is much stronger than that of a 250F, but it's smooth and linear and not hard hitting like you'd expect from a factory bike. However, the real factory power was found high in the RPM range, and that's where we really had some fun. So why was this factory Pro Circuit bike different than the previous Pro Circuit KX250s that we have tested? The answer is found in Kawasaki's new generation KX250 engine. It received big updates in 2020 and more updates in 2021. Then the engine stayed exactly the same as the rest of the bike did in 2022. So Kawasaki's R&D department elected the chase after KTM, and they made a 14,000 RPM running engine, which was identical basically to the KTM 250 with a bore and stroke that was only 1/10 of a millimeter different. The KX250 from 2004 to 2019 had a bore and stroke that was 77 by 53.6 millimeters, while the newer engine has a bigger bore and a shorter stroke, going to 78 by 52.2 millimeters. So it's actually 1/10 of a millimeter shorter than the KTM, but basically copying the same bore and stroke of the KTM 250. The 2019 Kawasaki KX250, the last engine of the previous generation, that bike had the best bottom end power in the class in 2019, and it also ran with the top dogs in the mid-range. But on the high RPM range, that's where the KX250 engine went flat. So the previous style KX250 actually matched Yamaha's and Suzuki's bore and stroke, and like those bikes, produced great bottom end power. Now, the new style KX250 engine makes more room for bigger valves, and a shorter stroke has turned the KX250 into a higher revving machine for the stock bike, and that translates also into the factory Pro Circuit Kawasaki. So with a new engine and brand new chassis for Kawasaki in 2021, that meant the Pro Circuit had some serious preseason testing to do before it was ready to go racing. In a normal year, developing a new bike for Supercross is a daunting task that requires many long days on the dyno, at the track, and in the machine shop. But for 2021, it was an even greater challenge than normal because of supply chain shortages. Everyone in motocross knows the difficulty of getting parts nowadays, and this challenge wasn't only hard for privateers and local racers, but factory teams struggled with it too. Another piece of the puzzle that most people don't think about is that factory satellite teams such as Pro Circuit develop their own engines, and they don't have all of the parts handed to them by Kawasaki. Mitch Payton develops the internal parts to his own spec with the help of vendors. He even gets his connecting rods made by Pankel in Austria, which is the same company that makes Formula 1 transmissions and all of the stock KTM, Husky, and Gas transmissions. Mitch explained that many of the vendors that he was using and still uses to this day were backed up while preparing for 2021, which meant that testing and development of the KX250 engine got pushed into the season. So the bike that they started Supercross on, and even the bike that they started the outdoors on, was much different by the end of the season and got better as the year went on. So we have to admit, we expected Jo Shimoda's engine to feel faster off the bottom end, but once we learned how to ride the factory bike, it all started to make sense. Jo Shimoda's outdoor bike had to be revved to the moon, but once you started revving, this thing was a rocket ship. Mitch Payton also explained that their ECU map settings are tailored more towards top-end power for outdoors, while they bring a little more power down to the bottom end for Supercross, as well as they mess with gearing too. Most of our test riders who are used to hammering MXA test bikes were actually really kind and too gentle to the Pro Circuit bike at first, but once we learned that you don't need to be kind to it, we were riding this thing hard, and thankfully, it has a suspension to handle it. The A-Kit Showa suspension on Jo Shimoda's Pro Circuit race bike inspired each one of our test riders with gobs of confidence. When compared to the stock 48mm Kayaba forks, the 49mm Showa A-Kit components have larger outer tubes and cartridge rods, and they fit into custom-made billet fork lugs that Pro Circuit has machined to increase strength and rigidity on the front end. The new fork lugs use a titanium front axle with a stock 22mm diameter, and the custom fork lugs also extend further inside to the wheel, gripping the titanium axle a little bit more than the stock fork lugs would, increasing strength and creating a positive and precise front end feel. The A-Kit Showa shock has an oversized 18mm shock shaft compared to the stock Kayaba shock, which has a 16mm shaft. It has high and low speed rebound adjusters, where the stock body only has one rebound adjuster. Plus, it has a 3-piece Kashima coated shock body with tighter tolerances than the 1-piece cast shock body that comes stock on the bike. The shock shaft also has a check valve, and there's low and high speed compression adjusters and a low speed valve stack in the compression adjuster that offers additional tuning. So long story short, this thing has a lot more tuning going on in there. So in addition to the larger diameter components, additional tuning options, and tighter tolerances, the A-Kit suspension also has high-tech internal parts that are dimpled to increase oil flow, and they're Kashima coated to reduce friction internally as well. So these shocks have a lot going on, and they are next level A-Kit components from Showa. So how do the suspension upgrades translate on the track? The larger forks and shock increase strength and stiffness, while the friction reducing coatings reduce stiction and allow the suspension to be plusher. So this all allows the Showa and Pro Circuit race team suspension guru Adrian Bernal to work his magic. Adrian has guidance from the semi-retired legend of suspension Bones Bacon and from Bones replacement Luke Boyk as well. With stronger fork components and friction reducing coatings, Adrian can use lighter spring rates and valve settings than he would traditionally need if he tried to copy the same stiff feel that Jo Shimoda's suspension has and replicate it with stock components. The stiffer, stronger outer tubes and the stiffer, stronger, and just bigger shock shafts also just help to be able to lower the spring rate and lower the valving as well to make it more plush, but also hold up great as well. On the track, Jo Shimoda's suspension handled every bump and kicker at Glen Helen without blinking an eye. Our pro level test riders were able to go faster down the hills and into the corners because the bike never wavered, and surprisingly, our intermediate level test riders didn't complain about it being too stiff like they normally do when they hop on a pro's bike. Multiple test riders explained that they've never gone this fast going down the hills at Glen Helen, and the suspension, it covered all of our sins. Anytime we did something that was abnormal, the bike was quickly corrected by the suspension to go straight again. Kickers and bumps that we would normally worry about were no longer an issue. Jo Shimoda came to the Pro Circuit team after the Geico Honda team closed shop, and his mechanic, Matt Goodbread, also was a transfer from Geico. Matt mentioned to us how Joe is an ultra smooth rider who's easy on clutch plates, and he also explained something funny, that Joe is constantly leaving his bike in gear because it's so hard to get into neutral. The neutral detent on the shift drum is shaved down to prevent it from popping into false neutral on the track, and we love that fact, but it is super hard for us to get it into neutral in the pits as well. Going over the rest of Jo Shimoda's race bike, we have a few different parts to list off, some that are factory parts that you can only get from Kawasaki, some are custom parts, and some are parts that you can buy. So the first list we have are factory parts that aren't available to the public. Pro Circuit has a special blend of VP fuel. They also get spec Dunlop race tires, factory Nissan front brake, and a custom start button that is taller so it doesn't get stuck down. It also has a backup start switch on the subframe in case the first one goes out, and the radiators are custom with integrated oil coolers. KX250 has titanium front and rear axles with anodized aluminum axle blocks, titanium foot peg holders, and a titanium swing arm pivot bolt. Kawasaki supplies the factory hubs, ECU, factory front brake caliper, rear brake pedal with a folding tip, brake snake, and brake stop that is built into the swing arm pivot to ensure the brake pedal doesn't bend up. Kawasaki also provides a data acquisition sensor that comes and connects to the ECU to link with the gear position sensor to monitor which RPM and gear the bike is in on each section of the track, and it also counts lap times. Pro Circuit also uses a boatload of its own parts that you can buy through the Pro Circuit catalog, including the Tie 6 exhaust system, shock linkage, Showa Pro Circuit suspension, Pro Circuit triple clamps, bar mounts, throttle tube, titanium foot pegs, brake clevis, carbon chain guide, Pro Circuit branded starting device that's actually made by Works Connection, timing plug caps, oil plugs, water pump, clutch cover, ignition cover, front brake line holder, and shift lever. In addition to the Pro Circuit parts that are available to the public, Joe's bike also uses lots of aftermarket parts that you can buy, including a full Hinson clutch with Pro Circuit clutch springs, JE piston, Works Chassis Lab motor mounts and head stays, braking front brake rear rotors, Renthal handlebars, grips and sprockets, and plus it also has a RK chain, titanium rear sprocket bolts, twin air filters, Artec plastic, throttle syndicate seat covers and graphics, light speed carbon fiber skid plate, front and rear brake rotor guards, and case savers. A day of riding on a factory Pro Circuit Kawasaki KX250 is a day that you never want to end, but by the end of it, all of the MX8 test riders were sore and tired and extremely thankful for the opportunity to ride this factory bike. So thank you to Mitch Payton and Pro Circuit Kawasaki for allowing us to ride Jo Shimoda's rocket ship. It surprised us at first that it wasn't as hard hitting on the bottom end, but once we found that factory power on top, we had a blast riding this bike. you like this video, be sure to subscribe to the Motocross Action YouTube channel to stay up to date with more videos that we have coming to the channel. Also, check us out on motocrossactionmag.com for the latest Supercross news, race results, bike tests, product tests, and more. Thank you guys for tuning in. And if you have some more time, click the thumbnails now to see some more of our recent videos.